Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian War, and we're going to start off today where we ended yesterday with the Russians continuing to take control of areas in and around the town of Soledar, directly to the north of Bakhmut. And you can see here from the deep state map, the Russians are firmly in control of the center of the town. They also control areas to the southwest and to the northwest as well. We believe at this point there are probably very few, if any, Ukrainian forces continuing to resist in Soledar proper, probably small platoon-sized elements at the most. We had heard there was still roughly a battalion-sized element in and around Soledar, with some fairly significant reserves of Ukrainian forces, including 2 tank brigades to the west of Soledar. But it does look like the Russians are wrapping up operations and will probably look to turn again south towards Bakhmut from Soledar. We can anticipate the Russians will continue to press to the west and then turn and rotate towards the rear of Bakhmut at some point. Now, we have also seen a lot of reports in the mainstream media about the changing of the command structure again, with Surovikin being removed as overall battlefield commander in charge of Ukrainian operations, to handing it over to Gerasimov. Now, what's interesting with Gerasimov taking over, and Surovikin will still be in the picture, so to speak. He will be Gerasimov's deputy commander. So he is not going back to being charged with the control of essentially the Russian Air Force. There was also just a quick a comment that was made that Surovikin was originally commander of the Air Force, so basically he had no business being in charge of the Ukrainian operation. Well, so first, just the fact that Surovikin was in charge of the Russian Air Force is a bit strange. If you look at Surovikin's background, it is in motorized rifle commands. He originates as a company battalion commander in Russian motorized rifle battalions, and he went on to command Russian motorized rifle divisions as well. So his origin story is not with the Russian Air Force. He eventually was in command of what essentially is the Russian Air Force, which is a bit strange given his background in these motorized rifle regiments. But again, he will not be going back to that post. He will be deputy commander under Gerasimov. Now, what is interesting is that there are 3 individuals in Russia that have the ability to authorize the use of nuclear weapons. Obviously, one is Vladimir Putin, and then secondly is Shoigu, defense minister, and third is Gerasimov. He has the ability to authorize the use of battlefield tactical nuclear weapons, obviously with the approval of the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So it's interesting to see this change of command, and again, as I talked about in the previous video, very similar to if the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff were to, say, command operations in Iraq or Afghanistan. a bit bigger in scale in terms of what's happening right now in Ukraine, but nonetheless, you can compare and contrast those two leaders with what the Russians are doing right now. Additionally, we keep hearing talk about the prospect that the United States, Germany, Poland, France are sending these armored vehicles to the Ukrainians. And there's been a lot of talk that these armored vehicles could create some kind of shift in the Russian battle strategy. It could change even the outcome on the ground. And I got to tell you, that is just ridiculous. Having 40 or 50 Bradleys delivered to the Ukrainians, having 40, 50 Marder 2s delivered to the Ukrainians, having a few dozen AMX-10 RCs delivered to the Ukrainians is not going to change what's happening on the battlefield right now. It obviously will help the Ukrainians, but the Russians do have the capability to defeat any of these systems. What the French are sending is quite honestly a little bit ridiculous. The AMX-10 RC, when you first look at it, it looks like a tank, and many in the media report that the French, quote unquote, are sending the Ukrainians tanks. These are not tanks. These are wheeled reconnaissance vehicles. These AMX-10 RCs are really designed to be airlifted into sub-Saharan African countries and put down local insurgencies. It gave the French the ability to deploy fire support vehicles against in low-intensity conflicts. So the idea that these AMX-10 RCs with these 105 medium-pressure guns, low-pressure guns, are going to be of much use for the Ukrainians against Russian T-90, T-80, T-72 Bravo 3s is kind of ridiculous. It really is. But again, I believe it's about appearances. And when the mainstream media sees the French are handing over these vehicles, and the mainstream media has no idea what these vehicles' capabilities are, they believe that the French are probably doing their part. But in reality, the French are sending very little to the Ukrainians. Probably more anti-tank guided weapon systems handed over by the French to the Ukrainians would help the Ukrainians more than these AMX-10 RCs. And there's also been talk about the Poles sending Leopard 2s to the Ukrainians, and that could, again, change the dynamics on the ground, which it will not. Okay, the Russians, as we speak, are starting to field more and more of a new weapon system. And I wanted to talk about that weapon system. We saw it earlier in the conflict. Very, very few of these weapon systems were deployed. They were first deployed by the Russian FSB on Mi-8 special operation helicopters. These weapons are air-to-ground guided missiles. They are called LMURs, or the Russians also call them Item 305. Again, these were classified weapon systems. Again, they started off being used by the FSB, and now they've been adopted by the Russian military itself, the Ministry of Defense, Air Force, and Ground Forces. The LMUR, or the Item 305, weighs about 200 plus pounds. It has a 50-pound warhead on it. Has a range of just over 7 miles, 7-8 miles. It has a fire and forget capability, meaning the person using the system, meaning the helicopter pilot so far, has the ability to lock on to a target, and then the missile is essentially fire and forget. And it can also be used as somewhat of like a drone system. It can be fired towards the enemy, miles away from the enemy. And the pilot has a direct data link with this weapon system, meaning he can visually see what the missile is seeing in the thermal spectrum. He can then identify a target, whether it's an armored vehicle or a building or a bunker that's being used by troops. He can then lock onto that building, and then the missile will automatically guide itself to that target. And he can do this before launch or after launch while the missile is in the air. It has the capability of basically destroying any vehicle on the battlefield. Has a very large warhead. So if the Ukrainians receive these Leopard 2s and other armored vehicles that have been sent over, in all likelihood, as the Russians ramp up production of these LMURs, or Item 305, as the Russians call them, we could see these Leopard 2s fall prey to those weapon systems. And we're starting to see, again, more and more of these LMUR missiles being used by the Russians. If you search on YouTube, you can find there's plenty of videos out there. It looks very much like a javelin, and it operates very similar to a javelin, whereas a javelin's a ground launch system. And I'm also hearing that these systems as well, the Russians are working on making them ground launched, and in all probability they have now ground launched systems of these Item 305s. But not only that, the Russians have a host of other weapon systems that can mission kill a Leopard 2 as well. And again, are the Leopard 2s good tanks? Yeah, absolutely. They're very good tanks. Do they have the ability on a tank versus tank duel, which we've seen very few of in this conflict, by the way? To kill T-72s and T-80s. Yeah, they do. They have better thermal optics where they can probably identify the Russian tanks at a greater distance. The Leopard 2 120 millimeter smoothbore gun, same 120 millimeter Rheinmetall that's on the M1A1A2 is on the Leopard 2 as well. Very good gun. Kill any tank on the battlefield, hands down. But again, it's just not tanks killing tanks in this war. Again, many other weapon systems, to include a lot of artillery, are killing tanks in this war. So I would suspect that we would very, very quickly see these Ukrainian Leopard 2s and even M1 Abrams that would be sent to the Ukrainians being mission killed or outright destroyed by Russian capability. Again, while these are good tanks, they're much better than the T-64s and various upgraded T-64s that the Ukrainians are using, and would definitely give the Ukrainians a tank-on-tank advantage depending on how they're deployed. But again, that doesn't mean that other Russian systems won't negate that capability. And again, we're starting to see more and more of the use of these Item 305s that are being used in other systems as well. Again, the Russian defense budget is rapidly expanding. 60 billion, now we believe it's probably upwards to 90 to 100 billion. And the Russians are starting to produce new weapon systems. They are starting to change their doctrine in response to battlefield setbacks, which is normal in war. So I just wanted to touch on that. We'll continue to watch what is happening near north of Bakhmut near Soledar. We'll continue to watch what's happening near Bakhmut, and we also suspect that the Ukrainians, we could see more Ukrainian operations start to take place. Where that's going to occur, difficult to say. Most probably, again, in the direction of Melitopol. I've talked about what would happen if the Ukrainians are able to launch a successful offensive operation and cut this land corridor. Now, I would have to say at this point, I question that capability by the Ukrainians. I don't believe the Ukrainians have that ability right now to mount a successful offensive operation towards Melitopol. The redeployment of Russian troops from the Kherson area of operation has again increased the force density of Russian forces in this area, making it very, very difficult for Ukrainian forces to launch said operation. So we'll continue to watch this vicious fighting that is taking place in and around Bakhmut. Incredibly vicious fighting, huge casualties on both sides, both Ukrainian and Russians, in the ongoing battles that are taking place from Soledar all the way down south of Bakhmut. So we'll continue to cover. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.